Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast for part two of the Ontario Leaders Debate.
You profit from fear and hate, hoarding wealth and amassing power. The walls have been unleashed. We will not submit or cower. It's humanity's darkest side. We are ruled by thieves and liars.
So, last time we were here all together, we ended up leaving off after they were discussing. I guess it was they were discussing some issues with policing was the last thing that they were talking about since then. And it was just getting a little too long. I didn't want it to go on for a couple of hours, or at least split it up into a couple different ones. But so now we are continuing on with the second half of the debate. And right now, they are talking about questions about drugs and transit. So this is going to be a very interesting one, if you ask me. Especially, actually, I have more of an interest in the transit because, well, I really don't expect anybody inside of the any of our three candidates to really be well versed in what's going on with transit. My guess has been years, if ever, that any of these people have actually taken a bus on a regular basis. So this is going to be interesting, and I wonder if they can actually, if any of them can nail down some of the problems faced by people who are taking transit these days, because I know I fucking hate the bus. I hate the fucking bus. But sometimes you gotta take it, like when I was going to school in the mornings, like, I could get up earlier to walk it, but usually I was too tired to do that, so I just suck it up and take the bus, but all in all, if I don't have to take transit, I really don't, because I can't stand it. And the first thing I wanted to point out is apparently this guy here, who's going to be taking the questions, apparently he's another Adrian. But I just want you all to remember that I am the better Adrian, so don't ever forget it. Alright, let's continue on with part two of the debate. So it looks like we're going to be starting off with drugs first, I believe, and then they're going to get into the transit questions. So let us begin.
Our next question comes from a man I met last fall. He's concerned that government policies are putting more drugs into his neighborhood.
When the sun goes down, you see, 3 or 4 heroin and crack dealers show up in front, and then the entire neighborhood comes to buy their drugs in the open air with police driving by all day.
That first-hand account from the co-owner of the football factory here at Bathurst in Richmond. How his neighbor to the north is the Queen West Health Community Center. Area businesses here say since that center was named as a potential safe injection site, they've seen a spike in drug dealers and users.
When you're focusing so many at-risk people in a neighborhood, you're destined to have issues.
And Patrick is with us tonight. Patrick, your question for the leaders.
The province is funding safe injection sites and will be running legal marijuana stores in our neighborhoods. What will you do to keep those neighborhoods safe?
I think that's a fair question, actually. I kind of like that question because I am actually in favor of safe injection sites because they do make things a little bit better for the people who are involved. For instance, it gives them clean needles, prevents the spread of diseases, and at the very least, it doesn't allow all the druggies and homeless people to be spread out across the city, usually concentrated into one area. However, I do think that if we're going to do safe injection sites, they shouldn't be right in the middle of a urban residence. Should be a little out of the way, at the very least. Just for reasons like that, like he's saying, that it could definitely lead to the spike in drug dealers and crime that's going on. So I like the overall idea of safe injection sites, but it's not the, but as many people have already pointed out in the past, it's not the be-all, end-all solution to druggies. It's only a temporary solution and gives them more of a safe area, so if they ever overdose, that they at least have people there that can, save their fucking lives. But anyway, let's see how our leaders answer this.
Mr. Ford, you're up first.
Well, my friend, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to have injection sites in neighborhoods. I strongly believe that we should have rehabilitation programs. I've announced $1.9 billion for mental health, addiction, and housing support. We will make sure we allocate the proper funds to have beds ready for people that have addictions. I've crisscrossed this province. I've talked to numerous people that family members have had addictions, and they're telling me they don't want an area that they can do more drugs. What they need is rehabilitation programs we will fund rehabilitation centers with the 1.9 billion that we've allocated.
Hell, you know what? Fuck it. I think Doug Ford's plan is a lot better than mine that I have, actually. Because, I do, like I said, I am in favor of the safe injection sites, but rehabilitation is the best way to go about with drug dealers. I don't agree with drug users. I don't think that they should necessarily be in a prison cell. They should be in a fucking hospital bed for their addiction. So this might actually be a better plan than what I originally thought Doug Ford was going to introduce. So let's see what the other ones want to bring. And it's fair enough. Like, he says he doesn't want safe injection sites in neighborhoods. I completely understand, because we also have kids around. That is the other thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Because many times in the past, they've also been in parks, is where they've located these safe injection sites. And, you know, in a park, that isn't like an area that just attracts children, you know, or at least it's by a park, you know. So we don't want to have children around when this is for safe injection sites.
We have looked at evidence, and we are working right from preventing people from getting addicted in the first place through to saving lives. And what safe injection sites are about is about saving lives. And so we will continue to work with the professionals. You know, when I go to the United States, I've talked to 37 governors, and we talk about NAFTA, but the second subject we talk about is opioids. And we talk about a crisis that is, it's a global crisis, and we are going to continue to work and look at the evidence. I have had the opportunity to meet with frontline workers at the safe injection sites. That's where people find support. That's where they actually find a route to housing, to therapy. So we're going to continue to look at the evidence and support communities to help people who are suffering from these addictions.
First things first is actually, this was my, when she's talking about the opioid addiction, this was my biggest complaint about when she was making drugs free for people under the age of 24. Now, actually, I still, for a little bit now, it's my birthday is going to be coming up soon, so I still, at the moment, could benefit from this. Even when she introduced it, I could benefit from this, but I was against it for this very reason, because I was well aware of how much the opioids are affecting people. And in fact, one of the main demographics it's affecting are children. Weirdly enough, it's coming from the two opposite ends of the spectrum, though. It seems to be the very poor, and it happens to be the very affluent who seem to be the most affected by this. I mean, in Ottawa, Canada is one of those areas, those affluent areas, you know, lots of big homes, lots of nice shops, but it also has one of the biggest drug problems in Ottawa right now. So, and the thing is too, she has not addressed any of his concerns. He said, what are you going to do to keep our neighborhoods safe? And, you know, at least when Doug Ford was talking about it, he was talking about moving them away from public areas and getting them more in rehabilitation centers. Her entire plan is based on research, it sounds like. Very, very similar to what the Liberals' plans have always been, is throw money at it, but it all goes to research rather than action, because it doesn't sound like she's going to do anything different. I do understand when she's talking about why she may put more support behind the safe injection sites. She wants it to be that people are safe when they're doing it, and yes, it can save lives, but she's not addressing any of the problems that this person brought up. And pretty much her plan is par for the course, just continue on the way we're going now, when clearly this is the wrong way to go about it. We can't keep going down the path we're going, because we literally have children dying of opioid crisis. We have people all over the area that are, well, again, there's crime that's coming in certain areas because of because there's so many druggies in a certain area, but she hasn't addressed any of this.
Thanks very much, and thank you for your question. And I know it's sometimes worrisome to see these kinds of things happening in your neighborhood, but I would have to say that I don't disagree with the idea that we do have to pay attention to what the experts say. And what the experts say is this is the best way to reduce harm for the individual, and reduce harm in the neighborhoods. I can remember when my party office was on Richmond Street, and I can remember leaving after a late evening meeting, and there was a gentleman literally tied off, and we know what that means, with his vein up, and he was about to inject intravenous drugs in the doorway. As I opened the door, he got scared, I got scared. I'm sure he wasn't safe, And so the idea is, let's save people's lives by giving them a safe place that's supervised, and then we can provide the treatment programs that they need. And that is...
So, again, I don't necessarily disagree with what she's saying about the safe injection sites, but she hasn't answered any of the question. Because the main thing they're talking about is, how are you going to keep the neighborhood safe? Now, even I think that Doug Ford, I liked his answer the best so far, but, you know, it wasn't completely answering what his concerns were. But at the very least, it was addressing some of it, because he talked about moving people away, the safe injection sites and the rehabilitation centers, away from the urban areas, away from the people. But Andrea Horwath and Kathleen Wynne have pretty much decided that it's just going to be par for the course. And I mean, it does, for the people who are involved, the drug addicts, it does make it safer for them. But then this guy's concern is that the neighborhoods for the people who are not doing who are not drug addicts, his concern is that they are now being put at risk, or it's starting to lead to, it's showing bad habits. Because, for instance, for the kids that are around, they're starting to see all these druggies around, and drug dealers are showing up. So this is definitely a big problem. And you figure that if they were going to do a safe injection site, that it would be much more heavily monitored by a police presence, for this very reason, that this would be a key place for drug dealers to show up to peddle their drugs to people. But so really, my problem with Kathleen Wynne and Andrea Horwath's position is that they didn't answer the question, and they just want to continue down the same path that we're going on right now.
We will start our 3 minutes of open debate now.
If I can just quickly add two quick things. When I actually went and sat in the tent that is now, it's going to be a permanent site now. It's going to be in a building, not in a park. But I had the opportunity to talk with the frontline workers and some of the addicts. And one young man said to me, he said, you know, the reason I come here is that when I'm ready, and he said, I'm not ready yet, but when I'm ready to look for housing, to look for a counselor, I know that the people here will help me find that. So he's being kept alive so that he can actually get on track. There's nobody in our society who hasn't been touched by addiction in one way or another, family or friends. And so we need to deal with the evidence. The other thing is, we're introducing cannabis. We're implementing the law that the federal government has passed, and we're doing that in a responsible way. We don't want cannabis sold in corner stores on every corner. I know that was what Doug Ford had put forward, but we want to make sure that there's a controlled rollout, because that's another culture shift that we are going through, and kids' safety is the top priority, and undercutting the black market is the second priority. So we have.
Well, first of all, she's talking about undercutting the black market, but right now, the way that the Liberals Party is going about trying to legalize marijuana, it's actually going to give more business to the black market. See, because right now, when this is unveiled, right now from the pricing that it looks like, they're going to be charging the average citizen more right now than what they can pay on the black market for a gram of weed, let's say. So why would people then go to the government source if they're going to be charged up the ass for their drugs when they can still go to the black market? If anything, the Liberal government is not making this any easier is not making it any, the Liberal Party is not making it any more difficult for the people to be, to get their drugs. You know, if anything, they're making it easier for them to get off the black market. So this sort of idea that she's talking about doesn't really work. Now, I don't know if necessarily Doug Ford's plan would be any better, but I think it actually would be, because it would allow people to charge their own prices from the sound of it. I don't know if that's actually a fact, but from the sound of it, from what I'm hearing, it does sound like he would allow people to charge their own prices, which means they could undercut the black market prices. But with the way that the government's going about it, that's not going to happen. This is one of the reasons I think government usually screws up whenever they want to implement something, because they want to do something that's better. They want to make a good change, but more often than not, because they're not really involved in, or not really much aware of how the average person goes about their daily lives. My guess is because they spent most of their time in politics and dealing with these people that they really forget what it's like to be a common person. That they're really not making the situation any better.
It's not going to undercut the black market, and I think that's the most worrisome piece of this.
Okay, so it looks like Andrea Horwath actually addressed exactly what I was just saying. She's not undercutting the black market.
Is that the the criminal element, if you will, that continues to be in the drug business in our cities is not going to be impacted in any way by the Liberal plan. And so when New Democrats take office in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have a hard look at what the Liberals have proposed and make sure that it does do what it needs to do, that it gets rid of the criminal element, and that it ensures that the locations that are going to be used for the distribution or the sale of marijuana or cannabis are done in a responsible way in terms of community safety and proximity to things like schools, because at the end of the day, all we all want is a safe place for our families. We want a safe neighborhood. We want safe business districts.
And that's why we're working with the LCBO that has experience in dealing with controlled substances. That's why we're working with the LCBO, and 40 stores is the start, and we will roll this out in a responsible, safe way.
But then this is also, once again, like, she's talking about how it's going to be rolled out by the LCBO. For anybody not in Ontario, that's a Liquor Control Board of Ontario. LCB, Liquor Control Board of Ontario. Yeah, that's right. LCBO. So that is run by the province for anybody who's not inside of Ontario right now. But we have the same problem we have the same problem when we're dealing with alcohol run by the LCBO that we would have with weed. Now, you don't really have a black market for alcohol these days, but one thing that would be very clear from a black market with alcohol, maybe there is and I'm just unaware of it, but one thing about a black market with alcohol is they could definitely undercut the prices of what the LCBO charges. Now, we already do have a black market for weed that's probably not going away anytime soon. It would take at least a few years underneath the legalization of marijuana before we started seeing the black market get undercut. But again, if they're just going to give this, if they're going to give control of this over the hands of the LCBO is going to charge up the ass for weed, and then it's not undercutting at all.
There's one thing we're all in agreement that we do want a safe neighborhood. We may take different approaches. One approach I won't do, Kathleen, I won't put it beside schools like you did. That's one thing I'll make sure.
Ouch. Ouch, because yeah, who would ever think that would be a good idea to put it next to a fucking school where children play?
The kids are safe, and we'll have
But
zero
you're going to
tolerance.
have it in corner stores.
No, actually, I said LCBOs. If you listen to a lot of interviews that I've done, I said we're going to have it regulated in LCBOs.
My
friend Kathleen,
look, Doug,
what I'm not going to do is put it beside a school. You weren't on watch. It was beside a school under your watch.
It wasn't
well,
beside
it was.
a school.
It was a few hundred yards away. So it's right beside schools. That's unacceptable.
Not far enough.
I promise you one thing. I'll keep the kids safe, and I won't tolerate any impaired driving with anyone smoking marijuana. It'll have zero tolerance.
But you know that what addiction counselors and what mental health professionals will tell you is that having cannabis in the same stores as liquor, that's not a good idea. So that's the thing. You have to look at the evidence. You have to look at what the experts say. You can't just have a slogan that then becomes a policy. That's not how it works. You have to.
So, wait, maybe, did I miss something? Because it sounds like Kathleen Wynne just said that she wanted this to be in the LCBO, and then she's criticizing Doug Ford when he said the same thing. Now, I have the same problem when Doug Ford talks about the LCBO as I would have when Kathleen Wynne wants to do it, or Andrea Horwath, but it sounds like Doug Ford's plan was not much different than Kathleen Wynne's about having the LCBO run it, and now she's criticizing him for it? Like, okay.
I will work closely with the community. See, my friends, this is a path we've never gone down before, any of us. So I'm going to work closely with the police. I'm going to consult with the communities and make sure they understand what this is, where we're going. Again, this is something that none of us have experienced.
Exactly.
But the other thing to remember, though, is that there are very few supports for people with mental health and addictions concerns. And so one of the things that we think we need to do differently in this province is focus on mental health and addictions. For 15 years, we've seen very, very little movement. There was an all-party committee that had all kinds of recommendations, very, very slow to make any difference whatsoever, because these issues continue to fall to the back burner. They're a headline for a couple of weeks, then all of a sudden people forget about it. We are going to bring forward an independent, separate ministry for mental health and addictions so that this issue doesn't keep falling off of the burner, so that we don't have 12,000 children waiting over a year on a waiting list to get some mental health supports.
But
Can you
Andrea,
imagine that? If your child...
Okay, that's a problem with the fucking, That's a problem with the system, though, the medical system. Like, I don't see what bringing in another ministry that she's talking about is actually supposed to improve the problem. See, if you want to improve the problem, you have to put, yes, money, of course, you always do have to put money, but you have to put more resources. You have to put more people in place, more facilities in place in order for people to get this access. So, just adding another ministry is not necessarily going to solve the problem. And I don't know, personally, I haven't fucking heard Andrea Horwath really talk about this over the last 4 years. She's been absent over the last 4 years. This is one of the reasons I just you would not find any support for me in Andrea Horwath, is that she voted in tandem with the Liberals for most of her time, and then now she's criticizing them for them, even though, I mean, there's been very few times where the Ontario NDP have gone against the Liberals. There's only been 1 or 2 times. In fact, one of the biggest times I can think of is, again, I think I mentioned it yesterday in part 1, was the strike that I was a part of when Andrea Horwath didn't want to put in back-to-work legislation. So personally, I just don't think Andrea Horwath's plans are good because they're very cookie cutter of what the Liberals are already doing. Throw more money at the problem and it'll solve itself. Create a bigger government and the problem will solve itself. But this is not what you need to do. In fact, one reason I believe that Doug Ford would be better for solving this issue is the fact that he actually has been involved in the community for most of his life. Even when he was a city councillor, he was involved in what was going on in Toronto. He's out there in the public space now, meeting people, the average person, and figuring out what they want. Kathleen Wynne and Andrea Horwath are not doing this nearly to the same degree. Kathleen Wynne goes out every now and then, but then she goes to these town halls where it seems like many of the questions are either scripted or, very limited on what is being shown to us from those town halls. And a town hall is very impersonal. It's very impersonal. So actually getting out in the community, going to fundraisers, just going out to community activities shows a lot more support, that like sort of what Doug Ford is doing, than what Andrea Horwath or Kathleen Wynne does. Although I guess this more part I'm talking more about Kathleen Wynne because once again Andrea Horwath has been pretty absent over the last 4 years.
If you're a child who's lost a parent, for example, who's lost a parent and is grieving and trying to get some support to get through probably one of the most difficult things they'll ever have to deal with as a child, you can't get those supports, and sometimes it takes well over a year to get that kind of help. No child should have to wait that long to get mental health services and support.
And we need to start wrapping up now.
15 years later, that's where we are in the province of Ontario.
And that is time.
Well, City News devoted 2 months of special coverage to transit and commuting, and we heard many stories of frustration, including from one woman I spoke with who thought the Vaughan Line 1 extension was going to ease her commuting pain.
The government is fucking terrible when it comes to transit. I mean, I know that in Ottawa, OC Transpo is the bus that we use, and they are fucking awful. They can't show up on time ever. And anytime that the government does want to improve transit, they just make it so much more complicated. We are in the process right now in Ottawa for the last few years of building an LRT system. Now, this is supposed to make things easier to get around for people, but we've had problems after problems after problems. One of the first big problems was early on, we found out that the budget was not enough, that the money that was being allocated to the project was not enough, and they had to allocate even more money to the project. On top of this, we've had countless areas of collapse and sinkholes simply because they're trying to build on areas that they're trying to tunnel under areas that have already been built. So now they don't have the structural support to maintain that, and they're starting to collapse. So this is causing things to be even more difficult. On top of this, they want to build an LRT system that's going to be super expensive, but the LRT is not solving one of the big problems in transit in Ottawa. And the big problem with transit in Ottawa is going east to west. Right now, if you want to get north to south, it's actually pretty easy because there's one bus, the 95, that runs pretty much from Barrhaven, which is one of the areas most south in Ottawa. Maybe not anymore because Ottawa's expanding. But for a long time, Barrhaven was like the farthest area south for Ottawa, and then we had a 95 that ran from Barrhaven all the way to downtown, right around where the Parliament buildings were. So it was actually pretty easy to get north to south. East to west, has always been a pain in the ass because there is no bus that travels directly east to west. They all go around the sides of Ottawa. They make their way down by the river. They make their way around downtown. They come around from the west to the east or from the east to the west. Or they'll do it again by going through Barrhaven area and down through the southern area. So in order to get to east to west, if you are busing, it takes like an hour at least to get one end to the other. It's absolutely ridiculous, and you can't just get there with one bus. You need 2 or 3 buses to get there. So transit has always been terrible. The government has always been terrible at dealing with transit. So let's see what the people of Toronto, what their problems are.
It's almost been every day that there's been delays, and it's added almost 15 to 20 minutes to my commute in the mornings.
Leah Benincasa says it used to take her an hour to get to work, driving to Wilson Station and taking the subway the rest of the way downtown. The new extension was supposed to cut that down to 45 minutes, with her commute starting at Vaughan Metropolitan Centre. But because of constant delays, she says it now takes her over an hour most days.
There's no space for you on this train. I do apologize, but stand clear of the doors.
Especially, you know, promoting this new line, and it's going to save people time and travel and all that. If it's something that you're promoting and something that's new and upcoming, it should work.
And Leah joins us here now. Leah, what is your question for the leaders?
Thank you. What incentives will you give for me and others to take public transit?
Good question. See, that's one thing that our politicians want us to do these days. They keep talking about how we need to make the move to public transportation, and one reason has to do with climate change, you know. It's very important that we get these cars off the street and we start taking public transit because it saves on a lot of gas, greenhouse, a lot of greenhouse emissions, a lot of CO2. However, despite this, have you ever in your life seen a politician on a bus to get to work? Have you seen him on a bike? Sure, you'll see some, but most of the time, it's actually a PR stunt. For instance, let's take Catherine McKenna, our environmental minister, who the only time you ever see on a bike is for a goddamn photo op. Meanwhile, she will take cars, trains, planes, fly all around the world, while meanwhile talking about how terrible these uses of transportation are, how terrible they are for the environment. And it's actually really funny just because I think it was yesterday, I came in one of the Discord servers I'm involved in, somebody posted a link to an article that was featuring a study that showed that climate skeptics have a lower carbon footprint than climate alarmists. That's right. People like David Suzuki, people like Al Gore, people like Catherine McKenna have done very little in their personal time to actually limit their own carbon footprint. I'm willing to put my carbon footprint up against any one of these people because I don't own a car. I don't drive. I either take the bus if it's too far, but if it's not too far, I walk. I will walk an hour to get where I need to go. I have carried groceries back in minus 20-degree weather, walking 15-20 minutes to get back to my apartment. So I'm willing to put my carbon footprint up against any one of these people.
Mr. Ford, you are first. Your time starts now.
Well, my whole political career, I've been fighting for rapid transit, not only for Toronto, but the GTA. And I'm here to announce that I'm going to build a regional transportation system that works for Toronto and the GTA. I'm announcing today that we're putting in $5 billion into new subways, relief lines, two-way go all the way to Niagara Falls. We're going to make sure that we build rapid transit. And I'm glad today to announce, again, we're putting $5 billion over and on top of whatever else is allocated to make sure we have proper transit, not only here in Toronto, that will extend right into the GTA.
The only thing right now about Doug Ford is that, considering how much of his campaign he's talked about cuts, this entire debate he's been talking about where he's going to put money in. Now, I'm not opposed necessarily to the stuff that he wants to put money into, but considering how he's talked about we need to make cuts in order to balance the budget, and then he wants to put all this money into these other areas, I'm starting just to get a little bit nervous that he's not going to be making the cuts that we're hoping. But, you know, it's only the first debate, and he hasn't unveiled his entire platform, and I actually think this is the smarter move to make because he hasn't given his his opponents too much ammunition. I mean, right now in this debate is where he's unveiling some of his plans. So we'll end up seeing what the future brings.
Transit has to be convenient. It has to be easier than getting in your car in order for people to use it. And so we have been building transit. There is, there's $9 billion worth of transit that's being built right now just in Toronto. We're in the middle of a $190 billion investment in infrastructure around the province. So we have been building and we will continue to build. But it's interesting, Doug, you say you're going to build transit. When your government was in office last time, you filled in a hole on Eglinton Avenue, and we would have had an Eglinton subway on that road if you guys had not filled in the hole. So we've been building. We know that there's more to be done. We've got a long-term plan, and we're building regional transit and hooking it up with GO, and that's one of the incentives for you, is that it will be connected and there will be integrated fare across the region.
That's your time, Ms. Wynne. Ms. Horvath, let's hear from you.
Well, Leah, I thank you for the question, and I think your question was missed a little bit in these comments, because you're saying that there is a new build that you're able to take advantage of, but you're still not getting the service that's necessary for you to get to where you're going on time. And people's lives are so busy. The last thing you need is to worry about whether you're going to have a 15-minute, 20-minute, half an hour wait for your transit ride. That's why New Democrats are going to reinstate something that the Conservatives got rid of and the Liberals have not reinstated, and that's operating funding, so that we can make sure that there are more trains on the routes, on the tracks, more buses on the roads, more routes that you can have access to. $330 million is what we're going to be providing just for the City of Toronto, but around the province, transit systems will get operating.
That is time. Will you now?
So I know she said that was only the amount being allocated to Toronto, but how much is her plan actually calling to invest in transit, is I'm wondering, because sure, that's Toronto covered, but what about the rest of Ontario? And the thing is, too, that I'm noticing is everyone right now, they're focusing in the GTA or the cities, but what about transit outside of these areas, more in the rural areas where people don't have access to this public transit? I think that is something that they should be addressing, but nobody has.
We'll have 3 minutes to debate, so starting now.
I mean, and that sounds great, Andrew. The reality is that the reality is that there's gas tax. And it's not overdue.
Gas tax. Yeah, gas tax put in by the fucking Liberals. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. I mean, Kathleen Wynne and Justin Trudeau together have raised our gas prices so fucking much. Granted, not as much as they're probably facing in BC right now, although you can probably blame that on the Premier Horgan right now rather than anything else. But on top of this, she's talking about this. Well, there's a gas tax. There's a gas tax. She's also trying to push people towards having more electric cars, but she's also raised the price of electricity. So how the fuck is she making it easier on anybody to get around or to commute? She isn't. Fucking Kathleen Wynne.
There's gas tax money that already is provided.
What happens though, Kathleen, and you know this, right?
You know what?
Places like New York,
can I just finish the sentence I just started?
What happens?
Which is that there is gas tax money that already goes to 99 municipalities around the province, and the problem with your plan is that the build doesn't continue. We have to continue to build transit around not just the GTHA, but around the province.
That's not true. We are actually going to be doing as much building. In fact, we're hoping to get it done faster than what you're doing, and we're not going to line the pockets of our friends with the financing model that you and Mr. Ford prefer. This is what the...
I don't believe that for a fucking minute. I mean, like, are we really expecting NDP, especially when they want big government, to be any fucking different than the Liberals who have had big government? Not even at all. And Kathleen Wynne has absolutely filled the pockets of her friends. But the thing is Doug Ford has talked again about this many times, how much it pisses him off, how unfair it is, how, well, saying something's unfair is not an argument, but but the point is that Doug Ford has actually railed against this. Now, if he was to then turn around and start lining the pockets of his own rich friends, this is going to definitely backfire on him, so I don't believe that she can actually throw that at Doug Ford. I don't believe that that is a valid criticism of Doug Ford. Definitely a valid criticism of Kathleen Wynne. There's plenty of evidence to back it up.
the Auditor General has said, what the FAO has said. You've chosen the worst way to finance transit with the sell-off of Hydro One. Thank you very much. Something that everybody in this province is against. And the Financial Accountability Officer has said it is the worst way to fund transit infrastructure, any infrastructure. And the P3 model has wasted over $8 billion of our public money. These are the things you talk about,
what the
Mr.
P3
Ford.
model has delivered
These are the waste things that you talk about, Mr. Ford. So I'd like to know whether you're going to be using the P3 model in your plan to build more
AFP
transit.
model has done. What the AFP model has done is it has meant that we've actually gotten transit built on time, on budget, and we've avoided costs.
And you have feathered the nest of your friends, Kathleen Wynne, to the tune of $8 billion.
What you're proposing, Andrea, would take $7 billion, and that would be $7 billion that would not be available.
Okay, I'm going to let Mr. Ford.
Because you said you're going to buy back Hydro One.
I'm going to let Mr. Ford weigh in now.
Speak.
You know something? There's one thing we agree, probably many things, Andrea. Yes, Kathleen's been feathering the nest of a lot of people and lining their pockets. What we won't be doing is feathering anyone's nest. We're going to build transit. Again, we're going to build the first regional transportation system that connects Toronto and the GTA. We will put $5 billion into this program. We will invest to make sure we continue the loop along Scarborough and make sure we have rapid transit. And as for Eglinton, we sat down and negotiated with your government. They refused to bury Eglinton out in Scarborough. They truly believe, the Liberals, there should be a two-tier transit system. One transit system for certain parts of the city, underground, and then when it comes to Scarborough, the 630,000 people that only have 3 subway stations that are begging for transit, you ignored them. You want them to stand out in the cold, freezing cold. Matter of fact, you weren't premier at the time, your predecessor was, and they refused to bury Eglinton.
So you know perfectly well, Doug, you know perfectly well
freeze outside.
Okay, you know perfectly well that we worked with your brother's government, and you also know that you, when you were there, cut 33 bus routes in this province, in this city, and you cut night routes for people coming from Scarborough. You did, you cut them.
And that's time, Mr. Ford. I'm sorry, we are out of time. I'm going to send it over to Pam Seidel now with analysts' debate of what they've been hearing so far.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. We don't have a lot of time. We're going to do a quick summary of 3 of the issues that we've talked to.
Okay, no, we're not going to focus on this at all. I don't care about that. So we're going to move on now to the next part, which is Ontario political leaders face tough questions about autism. Ooh, this should be interesting. And I believe, let me just quickly check this, I think this will be about the end of where we're at by now. More or less, yeah, it's pretty much the end for, this will be probably the last one that we cover. Alright, let's get into it. Autism.
And now it is time for our second leader's question. Kathleen Wynne, it is your turn. Who are you going to put on the hot seat?
I was waiting for that.
Well, Doug, you know, I think that the threat that you pose in terms of the cuts to the province it's really significant. So when you talk about 4% cut, what you're talking about sounds small, and you make it sound small, but you could cut 7,000 teachers in this province and find $1 billion.
Once again, he's never talked about cutting teachers before, so I don't know why she's even bringing this up, aside for as a form of slander in order to try and make the people look, trying to make it appear as Doug Ford is worse than he really is by trying to make these cuts, even though he said many times that what he's going to do for these cuts is go in and find where the inefficiencies are. He's already done this before. They did this in Toronto, and you know, it turned out pretty damn well for them. So I'm not super concerned that Doug Ford is going to be making cuts to our transit, to our medical, to our teachers, to our police. These would be the worst places you could make cuts. Now, it's possible he may make small cuts in these areas where it seems like things are unnecessary, but to actually act as if he's going to fire, whatever, 40,000 nurses, he's going to fire 7,000 teachers, is just absolute crap, because these are all areas we're facing a tough time right now. And these are all areas that was avoided by Kathleen Wynne when she was in office.
You could cut 13,000 nurses and find another $1.3 billion. So, you know, I guess my question to you is, why would you do that? Why would you put all those jobs at risk? One economist has said 75,000 jobs. Why would you do that and do it in order to give the richest people in the province a tax cut?
That's not what's going to fucking happen, because holy shit, let's look down at what happened in the United States. Trump gave a tax cut to everybody, and suddenly business flourished. Suddenly everybody, well, not everybody, but a large group of people were starting to get raises. More jobs were opening up. Their economy started to do better. Now, let's contrast that to what's going on in Canada. Right now, especially in Ontario, we're losing jobs. Our economy is terrible. Businesses are leaving Canada, and this has to do with all the taxation that our government has. The tax cuts will actually help bring back jobs in Ontario. Now, one thing too, that doing these tax cuts, it's going to bring back private jobs, not public jobs, not government jobs. Because the government jobs, first of all, government creates jobs for the sake of creating jobs, just to say that they create jobs. So it's not necessarily like these are actually useful jobs that they create. It's just they're finding ways to tell people that they've created more jobs. However, you cannot uphold the public sector if your private sector is too thin, because the private sector is the foundation of the economy. If you destroy the private sector for the public sector, you do not have the money you need to support that. And this is exactly what we're already starting to see in Ontario, and we're starting to see this across all sorts of areas in Canada. So this idea that he's just going to cut taxes and give it to the rich is absolute horseshit. A tax cut would benefit most people. Now, a lot of times why they say they're lining the pockets of the rich is because if they even give a 1% tax cut to the rich, well, because they have so much money and they'll pay a lot more on their taxes, it looks like they're getting a lot more back, which sure they are, but it's not lining the pockets of the rich in the way that Kathleen Wynne is trying to suggest. Kathleen Wynne has lined the pockets of her rich buddies this way. And she did it. She lined the pockets of her buddies, and she did it by sacrificing the private sector. So the tax cuts right now would actually help improve our economy, bring in more jobs, and actually might help people get paid a little bit better.
Why? How do you justify all of those jobs and all of those people for a tax cut for the richest people in the province?
Oh, Kathleen, you know that's disingenuous what you just said, because when I talk to the teachers, all they talk is about, hey, you don't listen to them. And when I talk to the nurses and doctors, they're constantly telling me how you've beaten them down for the last 6 years, that you're ignoring them. Matter of fact, when it comes to teachers, I'm going to have a group of teachers actually help us with the curriculum. When it comes to doctor and health.
Wow, what a radical idea. Having people who are involved in the industry help them write the legislation, help them make the ideas. Gee, that seems like a great idea. If only the Liberals could have figured that fucking part out for the last 15 years.
Healthcare. I'm going to have a group of doctors, which we have already, headed up by Dr. Ruben Devlin, former CEO of Humber River Hospital. We'll have other doctors throughout this province that actually tell us how to run a more efficient healthcare system. You have a bunch of politicians that don't have a clue about teaching and don't have a clue about healthcare.
So, Doug,
That's the
my
difference between
question
you and
was,
I.
Somebody please clip this, what Doug Ford said, and turn it into a Thug Life moment. You know, with the fucking glasses coming up and da-da-da-da-da. Please, somebody do that for me. And then please send it to me.
Question was, how can you justify cutting thousands and thousands of jobs? Because have you had that conversation when you talk to the nurses? We're going to cut 13,000.
That's time. We're now
Once again, he's never fucking said that. This is just slander coming from Kathleen Wynne.
we're now going to start our 3 minutes of open debate.
Well, Kathleen, it's very simple. Okay, you've put this province in debt, the largest debt in the world, subnational debt in the entire world. You have set a world record. If you want to talk about policies, you have the highest gas tax, you have the highest hydro rates, you have the most indebted region in the entire world, you have the longest hospital wait times, you have more scandals and political corruption than any government in history.
But Doug, let's talk.
I guess I can't drop my mic, so. That's the thing is, too, he didn't have to lie about a single thing on that. I mean, I like Doug Ford, but he is still, like, as a politician, they will lie. But none of what he said was a lie. Like I think I said it yesterday, that Ontario's population is a fraction of what California's population is, yet our debt is like 3 times that. We do have some of the highest hydros. We do have some of the highest gas taxes. And we've had scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal with Kathleen Wynne. So he literally just blown the fuck out of her simply by his stating facts. I love it. It's funny how often that the right wing can destroy the left simply by stating facts, eh?
You can take the first 5 pages out of the Guinness World Book of Records. You've set all the records.
That was awesome. You could take the first 5 pages of the Guinness Book of World Records. Dusted.
Let's talk about the truth. Let's talk about the truth.
One at a time. I'll take one at a time.
Let me ask you this, though. I want to ask you this. Yes. The other Conservative leaders, Mr. Hudak, Mr. Harris, they were very upfront about what their cuts were going to look like. Very upfront. They were honest about it. And I want to know, why don't you have the guts to tell people what your cuts are going to look like? What is in store for the people of Ontario?
Now, I've already stated on this thing, I would like to hear more about these cuts that Doug Ford wants to make. However, I have at least come to the conclusion that we can't know everything before we vote Doug Ford in. Unfortunately, we are taking some of this based on, I don't know if you want to say faith, but we can use that term for now. Because one thing that Doug Ford has talked about is he needs to get in and look at the books, and then he will figure out where the inefficiencies are. There's clearly plenty of inefficiencies in Ontario. But yes, I do agree that I would like to hear more about what his tax cuts are. In the past, I've mentioned that I've been a stickler for policy. I like to know what the platform is, and this is actually one of the first times that I've been willing to put support behind someone without their platform being very concrete. In fact, actually, when Donald Trump was running, one thing that I found hard when he was first running, that I found hard to support him, was the fact that I wasn't really finding a platform, and I wanted to know what he wanted to do. So I am unfortunately putting, I don't like to go on faith, but I am going a little bit on faith with Doug Ford's tax cuts, but I also, because he has in the past many times proven that he's willing to make these tax cuts with very little without providing more inefficiencies, I do believe that he can do this a lot better than either Andrea Horwath and obviously better than Kathleen Wynne could.
Canadians
damn
say
it.
we make the best.
Goddamn commercials, eh?
What is in store for the people of Ontario? You have to come clean.
Let me answer that, Andrea. I'll answer that, Andrea. Unlike both of you, I've actually helped run a government, not by myself, because we had great people like Mike Belgrand, a great budget chief, a great deputy mayor, Doug Haldy. So it wasn't just Rob Ford and Doug Ford. But we found over $1 billion. Over $1 billion of savings, and guess what, my friends?
But people should
on
know that
record,
in advance.
let's just go on record.
People should know in advance what they have in store if you become
Not
premier.
one single person in the city of Toronto got laid off. Matter of fact, we created 56,000 new jobs. We had more cranes in the sky than New York, Chicago, Boston, Dallas combined. The city was thriving. We had a surplus. We made sure that we had additional money. No one lost their jobs.
So
I can give all my teachers and nurses.
I want Kathleen Wynne and Andrea Horwath to shut the fuck up and let Doug Ford answer a fucking question, because both of these have been fucking terrible at cutting him off when he's in the middle of a conversation. And you know what? I think he's done it once or twice too to the others, but not nearly to the same degree that these other two are cutting him off and trying to talk over him.
Not one single person is getting laid off under our administration.
You know,
not one person.
Ms. Horvath, I will let you respond. Ms. Horvath, I will let you respond.
Mr. Ford, what you're saying to people is you're going to cut the taxes for the wealthiest, you're going to cut the taxes for the wealthiest corporations, and somehow you're not going to lay a single person off. You're going to find all kinds of savings. I think you need to be upfront about this and let people know exactly what you have in store, because, let me just finish this one sentence, because the price that people will have to pay in the cuts that you are going to have to make in order to achieve what you say you're going to achieve are going to be enormous. And that's what people have to think about as they look to the kind of future they want for Ontario.
So I'm glad that you, Andrea, I'm glad that you believe that Ms. Wynne has run this province as efficient as possible.
That's certainly not what I said.
Then if you don't believe...
Oh, crap. Sorry, guys. Hold on. Sorry about that, everyone. I'll figure it out where we were.
That's certainly not what I said.
Oh, here we were. Okay, so he just said that Andrea Horwath thinks that Kathleen Wynne runs it efficiently. Now, of course, this is, she never actually said this, that she thinks Kathleen Wynne runs it efficiently, and she's actually has spoken out many times against Kathleen Wynne and how she's running the province. But the thing is, the NDP plan is not much different than the Liberals. So she's criticizing the Liberals for not running it efficiently, and then she wants to run it the exact same fucking way. If anything, she wants more spending. She wants more to be underneath governmental control. So I don't really see how she's supposed to be any different than Kathleen Wynne. I do not believe she would be any different than Kathleen Wynne.
Then if you don't believe it...
But I don't think we have to go from this to that. I think we have choice for change for the better.
Not one single person will lose their jobs. I love the nurses. I love the teachers.
Yeah,
I support them 100%.
But they're going to cut their jobs.
You know something?
And that's time. Thank you. That's time.
Now to something that thousands of families right across the 416 have to struggle with every day.
Good job.
Mateo was diagnosed with the autism spectrum disorder when he was just 3.5 years old. He is nonverbal. He may only speak 1 or 2 words.
Once we got the diagnosis, it hit us hard. But at the same time, we were accepting it. We were fortunate because we were able to put him into therapy, and we had the support team to be able to do it financially. But a lot of people don't.
And Daniela is here with us tonight. Daniela, what is your question for the leaders?
We were forced to put our son Mateo into private school because of the lack of support available for him in the TDSB classroom. That lack of support causes disruptions in class time for students and teachers and puts the needs of children with autism on the back burner. What will you do to help kids like mine succeed in our schools?
Ms. Wynne, you're up first.
Thanks.
My only problem with what she's talking about in the public school system is there's already right now enough students that are not succeeding and that are not on the autism spectrum. So I don't know, the fact that they're trying to make this about a small minority, definitely we need something in place for people with autism, but I think there needs to be the bigger focus on the general population before we can start getting into specific areas of people with, say, autism and stuff like that. But I would like to hear what they have to say about what sort of plans they would put in place for people with autism. So let's see what they have to say.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the question. I was actually at the Etobicoke Children's Center this morning at Silver Creek School, and we were talking with parents who are in the new autism program. I'm not sure when you had to put your son in the private school, but the system has changed over the last year and a half. There are more services in the community, and those services are better connected with the school. We announced this morning another $62 million on top of the $500 million that has been in place, and part of that is about direct funding to families to help them find the services that they need. We listen to families, we listen to their concerns, and we designed the program with them so that they would have access. So I hope that you'll have a chance to look at the new program because it is very different, and the parents I talked to today are finding the support that they need.
One thing right now that's definitely making it more difficult for teachers inside the classroom is a few different reasons. One of the main ones is the fact that classroom sizes have gotten significantly bigger, even more bigger than when I was in school. Because a member of my family is a teacher, and she's constantly telling me about how difficult it is with all these children in the classroom. And the thing is now is every single child with a different problem needs a special way to be handled with it. It's getting a little ridiculous. On top of this, one thing actually is, believe it or not, the immigration problem is actually playing a factor into this. Because the member of my family who's a teacher, she's talked about how, like, last month she had a new student. Like last month in April, she'd been getting new students every few weeks. So then they've, like, middle of the school year, and they suddenly have new students showing up. So the teachers are already being put underneath enough pressure with a big enough classroom, and they have so many different things that they need to take in consideration with each individual kid. Whether it has to be because they have behavioral problems, whether it's because they have ADHD, whether it's because they have autism. So the idea that we can just handle this inside the public schools right now is, I think, a little bit naive, because they're already having enough problems and the resources are not being put there in order to help them. Now, they're trying to say that they're going to put the resources in, but once again, what are they going to do? Throw some money into it? Give some families some money? Is that all they're going to do? Because you have bigger problems than that. Simply by putting more money into the school systems, it doesn't really solve the problem, because once again, teachers have too big of a classroom to deal with every single student. So we need to get that in line before you can just start saying, well, we're just going to throw you some money and then for your autism, your child's autism, and then, you know, problem solved. You know, we're just going to tell the teachers they need to put more focus on your children with autism. Well, they really can't. They can't put any more focus. They're stretched thin enough as it is.
Mr. Ford, you're up next.
Well, I'm going to make sure that we have proper funding, proper resources, proper schools for any children with autism. We will be there to support you 1,000%. What I can tell you one thing, I promise you, you won't have to be protesting on the front of Queen's Park like you did with the Premier here. I remember those protests because you were cutting the funding, Kathleen. You weren't increasing it. It's taken you 15 years to come to light on this issue. I was over at the Arena Foundation yesterday at their bowling event, had a great time, consulted with them. We also supported Arena on numerous fundraising, but I'm going to listen to the people and I'm going to make sure we react properly.
So at least from the sound of it, if I'm understanding what Doug Ford is saying correctly, he wants to almost make it an alternative school for people with autism. And this is actually the best idea I think you can come up with, rather than try and integrate into the public school system. For the sole fact that, once again, everything I stated before, the teachers are too spread thin, have too much to worry about right now. See, the main problems right now in schools isn't coming from the teachers, it's coming from the school boards. And it's coming from the government's involvement in the school boards. So it sounds like Doug Ford's plan is to almost make an alternative high school, or alternative school, for people with special needs and autism. And this is probably the best way to do it, because then you can have specialized teachers who are meant to handle with that. If you can have the smaller classroom sizes, so that way the teachers can work with each individual student better, then that'll work perfectly. But that's if I'm understanding his plan correctly.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I want to say, first of all, congratulations that you've been able as a parent to provide the supports for Mateo that you know that he needed. And you're right. So
I don't know. It's like she's congratulating her for being a parent, I guess. Okay.
So many parents with children with autism don't have that opportunity. And I've talked to parents who've had to remortgage their homes, who've had to sell their homes and move to apartments, who have literally sold off their cars, their furniture, just to scramble together enough money to provide their children with the opportunity to reach their full potential. And it's a situation that for 15 years has not been addressed by this Liberal government. They took parents to court when the parents were trying to get autism services or supports in the schools. They tried to cut off services at age 6, if you recall. We will make sure that services are available and in the classroom with EAs in every single classroom.
And that's time. We will start.
Well, once again, where are you going to get these people? You can't just throw the money at it and expect it to do better. You need to provide the resources. You need to provide it so that people, you give them an incentive to go into the industry and then stay into the industry. This is one thing that they're trying to do with trades right now, because the trades there's not a lot of people going into them, is they're trying to provide incentives for people to go into the trades. So you need to provide incentive, but Andrea Horwath's plan, once again, is just more money. We're going to, like, if she can actually provide those special service providers for each classroom, fine, but how are you going to do that without providing incentive for people to actually go inside that industry?
3 minutes, open debate.
So the fact is that we have been working with families for years to design a program that actually meets their needs. One of the challenges has been direct funding, and we have put that in place now. The other challenge has been the connection between community services and school services, and we are working to make sure that every school has the training, the staff have the training that they need, and the program has changed. Doug, I gotta say to you,
I actually will give Kathleen Wynne a little bit of credit here because she's been much better on this than Andrea Horwath. At least for her, she said she was going to throw money and then she was going to provide services for them, provide resources for them, which again is what you need. So I hate to say it, but I actually think Kathleen Wynne makes a much better point than Andrea Horwath here.
Teachers,
sorry,
though,
Andrew, can I just hold on one second?
When we talk to teachers, though, they're saying that those are not there, those supports.
You didn't even want
Shut up, Andrea.
in your community that would serve kids with autism. Now, come on. I hear you're now empathetic, but what is that about? What do you really believe about kids with disabilities and kids with autism?
Let me tell you something. I've supported I've been a Rotarian my whole life, helping families with disabilities, with children with autism.
Home in your neighborhood.
And I actually, without even going through the proper protocol, I approved the home in my area without going through protocol. So again, you're being disingenuous like you usually are. What I'm going to do is focus on proper funding. I'm going to make sure there's not one single protest on Queen's Park like they had from you. I'll make sure that I never, ever have to go to court with any family with autism. I will be there to help you. I will be there to support you, and I will give you the proper resources that you need.
If you're cutting across government, you're cutting education, you're cutting healthcare, because you can't take $6 billion out of services in this province and not hurt education, healthcare. How are you not going to hurt the programs that we have just built up?
It doesn't add up.
You cannot make that math add.
It doesn't add up.
You know what? We both, all three of us, come from two different
Here it
schools
is.
of economics. You two come from tax, spend, spend, spend. Government is the most efficient in the world. I can assure you, when I've crisscrossed Ontario, and I've crisscrossed every single town, I have met more people in the last couple months than both of you combined. And when I tell people,
I actually agree with that because going to a town hall does not mean you meet somebody and actually interact with them. It means they get, 2 minutes to ask you a question, you answer it, and then, if you decide to answer it, and then move on. So, I don't know about Andrea Horwath, but in terms of Kathleen Wynne, this is absolutely correct.
Tell people, I can tell you, well, actually I have, but when I tell people, my friends, we will find 4 cents on every dollar of efficiencies. You know the reaction? No matter if it's from Ottawa or Windsor or Kenora, they break out laughing. That's all you can find is 4 cents efficiencies.
Are gonna hurt people,
they know you've mismanaged taxpayers' money.
But Doug, you've
With
said
all
to
your
municipalities,
scandals, you can add up the billions of dollars of your scandals. We'll save that money and put it, reallocate
Doug, you
it into
said to municipalities. You said to municipalities when you were in Cornwall, you said to municipalities that, oh sure, you'll keep funding infrastructure, but only if they cut services in their municipality.
You know what? We don't have to go from bad to worse in this election. We don't have to go from bad to worse.
You said they had to find efficiencies, meaning cut.
No, I didn't. You know something?
What did you say then? What did you say?
I said we're going to find efficiencies, and we will make sure that we go across the province.
So we're going to cut provincially and municipally.
And that's time.
That's up to the municipality. That's
Thank you.
One last thing I wanted to address on this is when they're talking about Doug Ford going across the province and meeting more people, I absolutely believe this because, I mean, Doug Ford was already made his way across the provinces, across Ontario before, but ever since he started campaigning for the PC leadership, that's what he's been doing. If you've paid attention to his Twitter at all, they're constantly uploading, he's in this town, he's in that town, he's meeting with people here, he's at this event there. And it's gone from Southern Ontario to Northern Ontario. I don't believe that either one of these two, the NDP, Liberals, Kathleen Wynne, Andrea Horwath, can actually say that they have met more people than Doug Ford.
That is time now for a quick Twitter poll update. I'm sending it up to Francis D'Souza.
Alrighty, so this is pretty much we come to the end pretty much now of the debate. There's really not much else. And apparently, according to their Twitter poll, people said that Andrea Horwath has their vote. And I don't know, maybe I missed it, but I didn't get to hear that thing about Doug Ford saying that that math is hard. which, you know, pissed off a lot of feminists online when he said that, which was really funny to see. They were accusing him of mansplaining to Kathleen Wynne. Oh my God, he's mansplaining. So I thought that was pretty funny. And the other thing I didn't end up seeing, although I do realize that some people were saying it about Andrea Horwath, is that whenever Doug Ford and Kathleen Wynne got into it, she'd be looking at him and say, this is the problem with Ontario, folks. But I actually, just looking at the way that Andrea Horwath handled that debate too, she was no better than the rest. She cut them off just as much. She tried to talk them over everyone at just as much. Actually, I think she was one of the worst ones for trying to cut people off and talking over them. And then she's sitting there going, this is the problem, Kathleen Wynne and Doug Ford. You know, I won't do this. Meanwhile, she's been doing it the entire fucking time. So I don't know. Personally, I actually would say that Doug Ford won the debate. The last thing I wanted to address is the fact that many Greens were pissed off that they did not have an area in this debate, that they were not on the ballot, and sorry, not on the ballot, that they didn't have a representative of the Green Party, and they were protesting, had like green tape over their mouth saying they're being silenced. But the Greens are absolute dumbasses, because you have to have a certain amount of support before you can even end up in the debates. If you were to just start saying, well, the Green Party deserves a stance, well, then how many smaller parties out there that'll make the same claim? How many are going to say, well, if you're going to let the Greens in who have next to no support, then why aren't we allowed into the debate? And next thing we know, we're going to have like fucking 20 people up on stage trying to debate each other. So it's very obvious why the Greens were not allowed in. And the dumbass Green protesters were just too fucking stupid to figure out why. Too fucking stupid to figure out that is because they did not have enough support in debate, but apparently that means they're being repressed. The last thing, too, is that there was a quick article that I just happened to see this morning, which was saying that apparently Doug Ford, it apparently was a statement by the PC party. I haven't seen it. It was only mentioned in the article and quoting, so I'd actually want to go and look it up myself. But it was talking about how the PC party was saying that they actually had, they put it as, like, in the news article, as hired actors there, but it was people that they brought in order to, outside of the debate, in order to show Doug Ford having more support. However, I think, without actually reading the article, without actually reading the statement by the PCs, I think this is being taken out of context. I think what they did is they ended up bussing in Doug Ford supporters to show outside, so that way they had the support there. But then people are trying to act as if they paid off actors. Now, I could be wrong on that, because again, I haven't actually had a chance to read the statement by the PC party, but I at least recommend that everyone goes and check it out, because it could be important. Even though I am a supporter of Doug Ford right now, it's definitely, if that's what was the case, and they hired on actors to bring him there, and if they hired on actors to go there and make it seem like he had more support, then it was a bad decision, because they already probably could have had the support for Doug Ford outside without bringing in more actors, and it just looked bad on them. So, not sure about that, but anyway, I recommend at least everybody go and take a look at it and see what that's all about. And that will conclude the first Ontario Leaders Debate. I want to thank you all for joining me for this, and if I have the time, I will put together more of these as the debates go on. I don't know if I'll be able to do all three, but I will try. Besides, I actually think that doing this might get it watered down pretty damn easily. I did this for the PC debate, doing it for this, so I don't want to start commenting on every single debate, just because I feel like this would sort of get watered down, this sort of content. But anyway, I might be back in the future for the other debates before the election goes down. And my last thing I want to say is just, once again, I said it yesterday, but now is the time to start registering for the Ontario election. We need as many people to go out there as possible. Although I don't really think we have to worry about Kathleen Wynne getting back in. Even if Doug Ford wasn't to win, chances are Andrea Horwath would get in. Now, I don't think Andrea Horwath is any better, but I would at least like somebody else than Kathleen Wynne in. But Doug Ford all the way for me. Can't wait for the election, and I do believe even now that the Progressive Conservative government is going to have a majority government. So, thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion.